be a rather intimate and interactive session. I think we'll struggle a little bit with the venue. So, especially for the panel debate later, I think it would be really helpful if people could rearrange themselves to be quite close to a microphone, because we don't have moving microphones, and I think it would be very difficult if to have an interactive session if we're spread out in this rather enormous auditorium. So if you feel you want to rearrange, please do so now. What we wanted to do with this session on ELIXIR, so maybe I should start with introducing myself. I'm Niklas Blomberg. I'm since 1st of May the founding director of ELIXIR, which is just about to start after a long preparatory phase. What we wanted to do this afternoon is to give a short overview of ELIXIR, and we will also have a look at what's called Biomed Bridges, which is a cluster project where a lot of these research infrastructures are coming together. And then most of the afternoon will actually be spent to look at the activities in the member states, in the nodes of ELIXIR. So we have presentations by 4 of our nodes, from Switzerland, from the Netherlands, from Spain, and from Sweden. And we will end up with more of an interactive Q&A session, which Carol Goebel, who is from the UK node, will moderate for us. So that will take us all the way through the afternoon. So with that, I want to open the session and just present ELIXIR here in a few minutes. So the role of ELIXIR, on the mission of ELIXIR, is actually quite broad. It's really about covering all the life sciences, all the way from medicine down to agriculture, environment, but also things like microbial farming and the bioindustries. And really the mission is to make sure that we have a sustainable infrastructure to handle biological information. And I think the way to think about this is really to think about a set of services on top of the physical e-infrastructures that we all are using, and to make sure that we have long-term usable services to handle biological life or biological data in Europe. And those are things like the data banks that we all know very well and are using all our time. And of course the challenge is really now, when they are growing, how do we sustain and make sure that we have both a capacity and the computable architectures on top of these data banks to make them still interactive, searchable, accessible for all the researchers, but also a set of other services to go around this. So these may be data access services, but there are also things like cloud computing or data transfer services. And I think one of the difficulties with infrastructure is when you think about an infrastructure, is that you tend to think about bricks and mortar. And I just want to take a few minutes to sort of look ahead for bioinformatics and life science data a couple of years ahead. And really what we'll see both in Europe and across the world is, of course, a very, very distributed data production and a very even more distributed data usage. So, I mean, if you think of something like Illumina HiSec, the sales went up 40% this year. So in 5 years from now, essentially every university, every medical center, every research site will have high capacity data generation for genomic data, but this is also true for proteomics and for many other aspects of data. Of course, we have a lot of large human genomic projects and a lot of large variation projects, but this is even more true for the agricultural sciences. So there are large plant projects, and there's also a lot of phenotypic data coming from plants, and of course also microbiome, the metabiome, and sequencing of environmental marker organisms. I think I said metabolomics. I think it's really interesting to see the work in the UK, where there is work on the national metabolomics and phenome facility from the Olympics, and there will be large volumes of data from other domains. And so, of course, in life science, we will have not only data production at many different sites, but we also will have very heterogeneous data and very complicated data. And so when we think of a life science data infrastructure, we know it needs to be scalable, maybe to several hundreds or maybe thousands of sites across Europe. And we need it to be able to deal with conflicting, incomplete, and often incorrect data. So when I think of a mental model of a life science infrastructure, it is not the CERN, it's not the large particle accelerators. I think of something much more like an electricity grid. So you have electricity production at many different sites, and you have major atomic power plants, powerhouses, but you also have regional, and you even have individual production of electricity, for instance in Germany now with the payback scheme. And the same goes for the consumers. You have power users. Large factories consume thousands of megawatts. You have medium-sized consumers, and of course you have the small guy who charges his iPhone. And so how do you build an infrastructure? And I think this is really, when we think of a life science data infrastructure, this is my mental model. It's something that goes across, is very distributed, probably very complicated, requires a lot of negotiations, but I see no other way forward, really. So with that said, I think we just touch briefly on how ELIXIR will be set up. So ELIXIR will be set up as a distributed infrastructure. And I think that's really the solution to this scalability challenge. And so there is an ELIXIR Hub. It's located in Hinxton at the EBI. But in each of the member states, there will be an ELIXIR node. And in most of these cases, these nodes are really national bioinformatic networks. So they are not a single entity in itself, but they often sprawl out and cover many sites in the member state. So ELIXIR is a very and a truly distributed infrastructure. And I think the advantage of this is that we can actually build both on national strength, but also on national priorities. And we should then remember that the bulk of the costs of ELIXIR and the funding of ELIXIR will come from the member states and will actually be spent in the member states to cater to local priorities. And the challenge is to build a coordination and connectivity on top of this layer that really allows European researchers to seamlessly interoperate regardless of where they are. Because we all know that we usually work in large, distributed, cross-national projects. So having said that, I just want to spend 1 or 2 minutes on where we are. So 15 countries have signed up for ELIXIR. They have signed the Memorandum of Understanding with the intention of establishing ELIXIR as an independent and permanent fixture within EMBL and using EMBL's status as an intergovernmental organization. EMBL has been around for 40 years, so we think it's a robust framework. And where we are now is that the countries are essentially ratifying this consortium agreement, and ELIXIR will be officially launched at an event in Brussels, 18th of December this year. So that's where we are on the legal side. So you will probably see quite a lot of communication around this over the next coming months as countries are joining and formally establish the organization. So I said a little bit about the timeline, so that's about the legal part. The other thing that really will happen is, of course, the parallel development of the nodes in the member states. And the goal of all of this is, of course, to have ELIXIR ready for opening of Horizon 2020, where there are where the research infrastructures are expected to participate. So I'll come back to this, and I think it's really critical to understand this interplay between an ELIXIR hub providing coordination and connectivity between the nodes and actually the fact that ELIXIR is built around national nodes, or the EMBL EBI, which is a large node. And I think you will have to remember that a lot of the services and the resources are already established in Europe, and we will see that when we come back to the node presentations. And they will, of course, continue to deliver these services through their own brands. It's not so that we will rebrand all bioinformatics services in Europe as ELIXIR. They will continue to exist, and this is more a backbone and a support organization to make sure that these are delivering in an interoperable and sustained manner across Europe. I also talked about national priorities, and I think it's a real strength. So if we look through the node proposals, and this is very much work in progress, and we have had one really successful workshop in the Netherlands, and we're following this up with a number of events now to really define the nodes. But the nodes have come forward with different aspects of bioinformatics that they think they can provide both as capabilities and as capacities at a European level. So these are, for instance, a number of nodes that think they can provide computing, either technology or even capacity for computing in the context of ELIXIR. A number of other nodes have said that we think we have tools that we want to maintain and promote in a sustained fashion. Of course, driving standards in Europe is really important, and a large number of nodes have stated their willingness in participate in adoption of standards and to drive the development of interoperability and data standards. And there should have been another slide. And of course, together with standards, the training is a really important aspect of ELIXIR, and actually the UK node, which won't present today, have said they will focus exclusively on training, at least in the initial parts. So in the last 2 minutes, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor for the type of services that we want to drive within ELIXIR. And we are running a number of pilot actions, short collaborative projects to sort of showcase services that we think will be useful for researchers in Europe. And the first group of these pilots really relate to the challenges of the large data volumes. So the European Bioinformatics Institute at the London data centers today have about 30 petabytes of disk. So the data available in each of these archives, or together in these archives, is really massive, and of course it's far too large for an FTP. And so this is normally served, of course, through the EBI web services, the websites, and all the tools they have developed over the years. But one of the things that are being developed, and I think Johannes will come back to that in the work from Switzerland, is collaboration between EBI and the SIB, is to establish what they call an embassy cloud, so a private research environment on top of this data. So you can actually move your calculations and your reference data to the 30 petabytes instead of bringing them home. Of course, another related aspect, in particular when we talk about human data, is how you deal with authentication and authorization mechanisms. And the Finnish node has done a lot of work of connecting the university authentication networks through these secure resources, and also to work on tools to allow ethical review and data access committees to speed up their work. And that's now piloted with some of the Finnish cohorts. If this is successful, this will probably be rolled out as a service for large parts of Europe. And I think that the final pilot also related to this is interesting because, of course, not all computation can be done at the London data centers. How do you get reference data sets on demand to national compute centers or supercomputing centers? And again, the CSC in Finland has, together with the EBI, started to look at these light paths. So those are essentially, you rent a part of the spectrum in a fiber optic cable, and you build services around that to allow you to download essentially reference data on demand to national or local supercomputing centers. So I think this is a really good illustration of the type of services that will be important for bioinformatics and life science research in Europe, and an infrastructure that ELIXIR then could sustainably provide, but also make sure that there is support and that we can trust these services for a long time going forward, so we can build on them in our daily work. So with that, I wanted to wrap up this part and hand over to Janet, who will say a few words on the biomed bridges. And I think we will simply save the questions to the panel debate later. If there are any urgent burning issues, then feel free to ask 1 or 2 questions now. But I would really prefer that we save that for the panel debate. Thank you very much.